$2.4 billion. That's how much Sheikh Khalifa bin Hamad Al Thani is worth. But get this, he's not just sitting on that cash, he's using it to revolutionize energy in ways you won't believe. We're gonna break down how Qatar's richest are secretly shaping the future. And let me tell you, it's gonna change everything you thought you knew about wealth. Sheikh Abdullah bin Mohammed bin Saud Al Thani. Sheikh Abdullah's not just another royal face in Qatar, he's the country's main man in Germany, but that's just the start of his story. This guy's on a mission to keep Qatar's culture alive and kicking, and he's going all out. You'd think a royal would be chilling on a yacht somewhere, but not Sheikh Abdullah. He's busy building museums and schools all over the place. It's like he's got a personal mission to make sure everyone knows about Qatar's rich history and culture. But here's where it gets crazy. Sheikh Abdullah took a tiny phone company and turned it into a massive operation spanning 10 countries. Yeah, you heard that right. Urdu was just a local thing, but under his watch, it went global. We're talking millions of customers across the Middle East, North Africa, and Southeast Asia. Now, you might think he'd be satisfied with that, but nah, Sheikh Abdullah's using all that business know-how to boost Qatar's culture game. He's got plans to turn Qatar into a cultural hotspot that'll make other countries jealous. He's not just talking about it either. Sheikh Abdullah's putting his money where his mouth is. He's investing in art, music, and literature from all over the Arab world. It's like he's building a cultural empire right there in Qatar. But it's not all highbrow stuff. Sheikh Abdullah's also into sports and entertainment. He's bringing in big international events and shows to Qatar. It's part of his plan to put Qatar on the map as more than just an oil-rich country. And get this, he's using tech to spread Qatar's culture too. We're talking virtual reality tours of Qatari landmarks, online classes in Arabic calligraphy, all that cool stuff. It's like he's bringing Qatar's past into the future. Sheikh Abdullah's not messing around. He's got a vision for Qatar as a global cultural powerhouse, and he's making it happen. It's wild to think about how one guy can have such a big impact on a whole country's image. But hey, that's just the start of our list of Qatar's richest and most influential. Up next, we've got a sheikh who's got so many hotels, you could stay in a different one every night for weeks. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Sheikh Faisal bin Qasim Faisal Al Thani. From selling car parts at 16 to owning some of the world's fanciest hotels. That's Sheikh Faisal bin Qasim Faisal Al Thani's wild ride. This guy didn't just inherit his wealth, he built an empire from the ground up. It all started back in the 60s when Sheikh Faisal became the only distributor of Bridgestone tires in Qatar. But he didn't stop there. Fast forward to today, and he's got over 20 hotels spread across the globe. We're not talking about some run-of-the-mill spots either. The Sheikh owns the St. Regis in Washington, D.C. and Miami, plus the W Hotel in London. That's some serious luxury right there. But hotels ain't his only game. Sheikh Faisal's got his fingers in all sorts of pies. He's a major player in Amal, a company that's deep into Qatar's real estate scene and sells medical supplies and pharmaceuticals. It's like he saw a bunch of different industries and said, yeah, I'll take all of those. Now you might think a guy with all this wealth and power would be all about the money. But Sheikh Faisal's got a softer side too. He's built this crazy museum with over 15,000 pieces of Islamic art and stuff related to Qatar's heritage. It's like he's on a mission to make sure Qatar's history doesn't get lost in all the glitz and glamour. And he's not just hoarding all this culture for himself. The Sheikh Faisal bin Qasim Al Thani Museum is open to the public. It's his way of sharing Qatar's story with the world. Plus, he's big on giving back. The guy's always throwing money at education and healthcare causes, not just in Qatar but all over. Sheikh Faisal's not all serious business and charity work though. Word is, he's known for some pretty wild purchases, but that's the thing about being this rich. You can afford to be a little crazy sometimes. His business moves have done more than just make him rich. They've helped put Qatar on the map. All those fancy hotels, they're bringing in tourists and helping Qatar's economy boom. And his other ventures, they're creating jobs and building up the country's infrastructure. But it ain't all smooth sailing. Even a big shot like Sheikh Faisal faces challenges. With more and more luxury hotels popping up all over the world, he's got to work hard to keep his spots at the top of the game. But something tells me he's up for the challenge. After all, this is a guy who turned selling car parts into a global empire. Akbar al-Baker. While Sheikh Faisal was building his hotel empire, Akbar al-Baker was setting his sights on the skies. But here's the kicker. His ambitions for Qatar Airways might just be the tip of the iceberg. What's al-Baker's endgame? And why are his rivals sweating? Akbar Al-Baker's not your average airline CEO. This guy took Qatar Airways from a tiny regional player to a global powerhouse. We're talking over 160 destinations worldwide. That's like going from running a local bus service to suddenly owning routes all over the planet. But Al-Baker ain't stopping there. He's got this crazy goal to make Qatar Airways the world's best airline. And he's not just talking about having the comfiest seats or the tastiest in-flight meals. Al-Baker's thinking big, like revolutionize the whole industry big. He's pouring money into new planes, top-notch service, and tech that'll make your head spin. We're talking AI that predicts what you want before you even know you want it. And get this, he's even looking into stuff like supersonic travel. Yeah, like those old Concorde jets, but way cooler. But planes ain't Al-Baker's only game. The guy's got his fingers in all sorts of business pies. He's sitting on the board of a bunch of companies pulling strings left and right. It's like he's playing 3D chess while everyone else is stuck on checkers. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Al-Baker's known for speaking his mind, and boy does he have a lot to say. He's called out other airlines for being failing and has some pretty strong opinions about airline subsidies. It's like he's got a personal vendetta against anyone who's not Qatar Airways. But it ain't all smooth flying for Al-Baker. Qatar Airways has faced some turbulence over how they treat their employees and their response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some folks are asking if his aggressive, full-throttle approach is sustainable in the long run. Love him or hate him, you can't ignore Akbar Al-Baker. He's pushing Qatar Airways to new heights, and he's not afraid to ruffle a few feathers along the way. The big question is, can he really make Qatar Airways the world's best airline, or is he flying too close to the sun? Up next, we're shifting gears from planes to pipelines. We're talking about the man who's got his hands on Qatar's oil and gas taps. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Saad Sherida Al-Kaabi. You thought controlling the skies was a big deal? Meet the guy who's got his finger on Qatar's oil and gas pulse. Saad Sherida Al-Kaabi isn't just another suit in the energy biz. He's the mastermind behind Qatar's black gold empire. But here's the real shocker. Oil might not even be his endgame. Al-Kaabi's running the whole show as Minister of State for Energy Affairs and CEO of Qatar Petroleum. That's like being the boss of bosses in Qatar's energy world. But get this, he's been in the oil game for over 30 years. The guy's seen it all, from oil booms to busts. Now you might think an oil tycoon just fell into the job, but not Al-Kaabi. He's got the brains to back it up. Dude's got a degree in petroleum engineering from Penn State. Yeah, that's right. He went from Pennsylvania classrooms to Qatar's oil fields. But here's where it gets wild. Al-Kaabi ain't just about pumping oil. He's playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. Under his watch, Qatar Petroleum's been cooking up some crazy plans. We're talking energy policies that aren't just about making money now, but setting Qatar up for the long haul. And don't think Al-Kaabi's got tunnel vision. He's spreading his bets around. Word is, he's got his hands in real estate and healthcare too. It's like he's building a whole empire beyond just oil and gas. But the real kicker, Al-Kaabi's got his eyes on the future, and it's looking green. Qatar's got some big plans for sustainable energy, and guess who's leading the charge? Yep, our man Al-Kaabi. He's dumping cash into solar projects and trying to clean up Qatar's Energy Act. Now you might think a guy like this is all about the money, but Al-Kaabi's got a softer side too. He's big on giving back, using all that oil money to fund education and healthcare projects. It's like he's trying to spread the wealth around. But don't think it's all smooth sailing for Al-Kaabi. He's got to juggle keeping Qatar's oil flowing with the world's push for cleaner energy. It's like trying to steer a massive oil tanker through a field of icebergs. So what's next for Qatar's energy czar? Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure. With Al-Kaabi at the helm, Qatar's energy future is going to be one wild ride. And speaking of wild rides, up next we've got a royal who's got his hands in everything from banks to diplomacy. You won't believe what this guy's been up to. Hamad bin Jassim bin Jaber Al Thani. From the halls of power to the boardrooms of global banks, our next Qatari royal's got a resume that'll make your head spin. Hamad bin Jassim bin Jaber Al Thani is not just another rich royal. He's a political powerhouse with some serious financial clout. But here's the real question. How'd he end up owning a chunk of one of Europe's biggest banks? Hamad bin Jassim wasn't just part of Qatar's government, he was running the show. This guy was prime minister for 6 years and foreign minister for a whopping 21 years. That's like being in charge of your country's entire foreign policy for 2 whole decades. He was the guy other world leaders had to deal with when they wanted to talk to Qatar. But Hamad bin Jassim's not just about politics. He's got some serious business skills too. Get this, he owns 3% of Deutsche Bank. Yeah, you heard that right. One of Europe's biggest banks, and this Qatari royal's got a piece of it. He bought it through some company called Paramount Services Holdings, and that's just what we know about. Who knows what other business deals he's got cooking? Now, Hamad bin Jassim's been involved in some pretty big diplomatic moves. He's the guy who helped broker peace deals and sort out conflicts in the Middle East, but he's also known for saying some pretty wild stuff, like the kind of statements that make other diplomats choke on their coffee. But here's where it gets really interesting. Hamad bin Jassim's not just about making money or political power. He's been using his influence to shape Qatar's future. We're talking massive investments in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. It's like he's trying to turn Qatar into a mini superpower. And don't think for a second that Hamad bin Jassim's slowing down. Even though he's not in government anymore, he's still pulling strings behind the scenes. He's got connections all over the world, from Wall Street to the Middle East. It's like he's playing a global game of chess, and we're just now figuring out the moves. So what's next for this political and business mastermind? Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, wherever there's power and money to be had, you can bet Hamad bin Jassim will be right in the middle of it. Speaking of power moves, up next we've got a fashion tycoon who's not just about clothes. He's got a famous ex you won't believe, Wissam Al-Mana. Forget everything you think you know about fashion tycoons. Wissam Al-Mana ain't your typical suit-wearing CEO. This guy's turned the Middle East into a playground for the world's biggest luxury brands. But there's a twist to his story that nobody saw coming, and it's got nothing to do with clothes. Wissam's the big boss of the Al-Mana Group, and let me tell you, this company's into everything. Cars, real estate, you name it. But fashion? That's where Wissam really shines. He's got partnerships with some of the biggest names in the game. Hermes, Giorgio Armani, Alexander McQueen. Yeah, those guys. But Wissam ain't just selling fancy bags and suits. He's changing the whole fashion game in the Middle East. Before him, luxury brands didn't really have a big presence there. Now, it's like every corner's got a high-end boutique. And Wissam? He's the guy making it all happen. You might think a fashion mogul's all about the latest trends and runway shows, but Wissam's got some serious business skills too. He's taken the Al-Mana Group and turned it into a powerhouse. We're talking major deals, smart investments, the works. This guy's not just about looking good, he's about making money too. Now here's where things get interesting. Wissam's been investing in some pretty wild tech for his stores. We're talking virtual try-ons, AI personal shoppers, all that futuristic stuff. It's like he's trying to bring the future of shopping to the Middle East right now. But Wissam's not all business. He's got a softer side too. Word is, he's been putting money into local designers and fashion schools. It's like he's trying to grow the whole fashion industry in the region, not just his own pocket. And yeah, you might have heard Wissam was married to Janet Jackson, but that's old news. The real story is how he's using his connections to bring more international brands to the Middle East. It's like he's building a bridge between Western fashion and Middle Eastern customers. So, what's next for this fashion tycoon? Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, with Wissam Al-Mana in charge, the Middle East's fashion scene is going to keep getting bigger and bolder. And speaking of bold moves, up next we've got a sheikh who's changing the entire energy game. You won't believe what he's cooking up. Sheikh Khalifa bin Hamad Al Thani. From fashion to fuel, we're jumping into the energy game with Sheikh Khalifa bin Hamad Al Thani. This guy's sitting on $2.4 billion, but he ain't just counting his cash. Nah, he's using it to flip the whole energy world upside down. And get this, he's doing it all on the down low. Sheikh Khalifa's pumping serious money into some wild new sustainable energy tech. We're talking stuff that could make oil look like yesterday's news. Solar panels that work at night, wind turbines that fit on your roof, even ways to pull energy right out of the air. It's like sci-fi stuff, but it's happening right now. But here's the thing, Sheikh Khalifa ain't ditching oil completely. He's playing both sides of the game. One day he's investing in solar farms, the next he's upgrading oil rigs. It's like he's got one foot in the future and one in the past. Smart move or risky business? Only time will tell. Now you might think a guy spending billions on energy would be shouting it from the rooftops, but not Sheikh Khalifa. He's keeping it all hush-hush. No flashy press conferences, no big announcements. It's like he's building a whole new energy empire in secret. And it ain't just about making money. Sheikh Khalifa's got some crazy ideas about the future of energy. He's talking about stuff like powering whole cities with nothing but renewables or cars that run on water. Sounds nuts, right? But with billions to spend, who knows what he could make happen? This ain't just about Qatar either. Sheikh Khalifa's looking at the big picture. He's investing in energy projects all over the world. Africa, Asia, South America. If there's sun shining or wind blowing, he wants in on it. It's like he's trying to rewire the whole planet's energy system. But don't think it's all smooth sailing. Sheikh Khalifa's playing a dangerous game. If his big bets on renewables pay off, he could end up ruling the energy world. But if they don't, he could lose billions faster than you can say solar panel. So what's next for Qatar's secret energy pioneer? Only Sheikh Khalifa knows for sure. But one thing's certain. With billions to spend and some wild ideas about the future, he's gonna keep shaking up the energy world for years to come. And speaking of shaking things up next we've got a royal who's secretly running the tech world. You won't believe what this guy's got cooking. Sheikh Mohammed bin Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani. Imagine having the power to transform a whole country with a few keystrokes. That's exactly what Sheikh Mohammed bin Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani is doing. But here's the million-dollar question. Is Qatar ready for his high-tech revolution? Sheikh Mohammed ain't just another rich guy playing with gadgets. He's changing the whole tech game, and he's doing it on the down low. This dude's got his fingers in every digital pie you can think of. We're talking AI that can think faster than humans, blockchain that's gonna make banks sweat, and tech so new it doesn't even have a name yet. But here's the crazy part. He ain't just buying fancy toys. Sheikh Mohammed's using all this tech to turn Qatar into a straight-up sci-fi movie. He's got plans to make Qatar the Silicon Valley of the Middle East. We're talking smart cities, robot workers, and internet so fast it'll make your head spin. And get this, he ain't just focusing on Qatar. Sheikh Mohammed's throwing money at startups all over the world. It's like he's building a global tech empire, and nobody's even noticed. One day we might wake up and find out half the apps on our phones are secretly backed by this Qatari royal. Now, you might think a guy investing in all this future tech would be living like a cyborg, and you'd be right. Word is, Sheikh Mohammed's got some pretty wild personal tech. We're talking smart homes that know what you want before you do, cars that drive themselves, and gadgets that make James Bond look like he's using a flip phone. But don't think it's all smooth sailing. Turning a small desert country into a tech powerhouse ain't easy. Sheikh Mohammed's got to deal with everything from training a tech workforce from scratch to convincing old-school business folks that AI ain't gonna steal their jobs. So what's next for Qatar's secret tech mastermind? Only Sheikh Mohammed knows for sure. But one thing's certain, with billions to spend and a vision for a high-tech future, he's gonna keep pushing Qatar into the digital age, whether it's ready or not. And speaking of pushing boundaries, up next we've got a princess who's more than just a pretty face. You won't believe what she's doing with $1 billion art budget. Sheikha Al Mayasa bint Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani. $1 billion a year on art sounds crazy, right? But for Sheikha Al Mayasa, it's just another day at the office. She's not just collecting paintings, she's rewriting the rules of global influence. And you won't believe how she's doing it. Sheikha Al Mayasa's got this massive budget for art, but she ain't just buying pretty pictures to hang on palace walls. Nah, she's using all that cash to turn Qatar into a cultural hotspot. We're talking major museums popping up like mushrooms after rain, and international exhibitions that make other countries jealous. But here's where it gets wild. Sheikha Al Mayasa ain't just going after old masters and ancient artifacts. She's dumping serious money into contemporary art from all over the world. She's snagging pieces by big names like Damien Hirst and Jeff Koons. It's like she's building a who's who of the art world, right there in Qatar. And get this, she's not keeping all this art locked up in some private collection. Sheikha Al Mayasa's opened up the Museum of Islamic Art, and it's packed with cool stuff from all over the Islamic world. It's like she's saying, hey world, check out our culture. But Sheikha Al Mayasa's got bigger plans than just making Qatar look good. She's using all this art as a kind of secret weapon. It's called soft power, and it's all about making friends and influencing people without guns or money. Qatar's making deals with big shot museums all over the world, and it's all thanks to Sheikha Al Mayasa's art game. Now, not everyone's happy about all this. Some folks are raising eyebrows at how much Qatar's spending on art, especially when some of these pieces cost more than a small country's budget. They're asking questions about where all this money's coming from and what Qatar's really up to. But Sheikha Al Mayasser ain't letting that stop her. She's busy showing off Qatari art and artists to the whole world. It's like she's on a mission to change how people see Qatar, one painting at a time. So what's next for Qatar's art queen? Who knows, but one thing's for sure. With $1 billion budget and a vision for Qatar as a global cultural player, Sheikha Al Mayasser's just getting started. And speaking of global players, up next we've got a sheikh who's turned sports into big business. You won't believe the moves he's making on and off the field. Sheikh Jawan bin Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani. What if I told you there's a man who's using soccer balls and racehorses to change a country's entire image? Sheikh Jawan's got a game plan that's way bigger than just winning trophies. He's turning Qatar into a sports powerhouse, and the world's watching. Sheikh Jawan bin Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani ain't your average sports fan. This guy's the president of the Qatar Olympic Committee, but that's just scratching the surface. He's the mastermind behind Qatar's massive push into the world of sports, and he's playing to win. You might think Qatar's too small to make waves in the sports world, but Sheikh Jawan's proving everyone wrong. He's been the driving force behind bringing huge events to Qatar, like the FIFA World Cup 2022. That's right, the biggest soccer tournament in the world, right there in Qatar. It's like he decided to put his country on the map, and he picked the biggest map he could find. But Sheikh Jawan ain't stopping at soccer. He's got his fingers in all kinds of sports pies. We're talking football clubs, horse racing, you name it. It's like he's building a sports empire that spans the globe. And get this, he's not just buying teams, he's investing in the whole sports ecosystem. Training facilities, youth programs, the works. It's like he's trying to grow a whole new generation of athletes. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Sheikh Jawan's not just in it for the love of the game, he's using sports to give Qatar a major image makeover. Every time a Qatari athlete wins a medal or a Qatari-owned team lifts a trophy, it's like a big shiny advertisement for the country. It's soft power, but with sneakers and sweat. But Sheikh Jawan's got his eyes on the future of sports too. He's pumping money into esports and virtual reality sports experiences. It's like he's betting that the next big sport might not even happen on a real field. Imagine watching the World Cup final from your living room, but feeling like you're right there in the stadium. That's the kind of future Sheikh Jawan's preparing for. Of course, it ain't all smooth sailing. There's been some talk about how Qatar's treating workers building all these fancy sports venues. Sheikh Jawan's had to do some fancy footwork to deal with those issues. But he's not backing down. He's determined to make Qatar a sports superpower, no matter what it takes. Sheikha Moza bint Nasser. Ever wonder how a woman in Qatar could change the lives of millions around the world? Sheikha Moza bint Nasser ain't just a royal. She's on a mission to transform education, and she's not messing around. Sheikha Moza's the brains behind Education City, but that's just the beginning. This massive project in Doha is like a playground for smart people. She's brought in branches of top universities from all over the world. We're talking Georgetown, Carnegie Mellon, and a bunch of other schools you've definitely heard of. It's like she decided to bring the Ivy League to the desert. But Sheikha Moza ain't stopping at fancy colleges. She's got her sights set on helping kids who can't even get to school. She started this thing called Educate a Child, and it's wild. The program's helping millions of kids in tough spots get an education. We're talking kids in war zones, disaster areas, all those places where school's the last thing on people's minds. And get this, Sheikha Moza's using education to shake things up for women in the Middle East. She's got programs that are all about getting more girls in school and more women in leadership roles. It's like she's trying to rewrite the whole script for women in the region. Now, you might think all this education stuff is just talk, but Sheikha Moza's putting her money where her mouth is. She's the head of the Qatar Foundation, which is dumping tons of cash into all these projects. We're talking billions of dollars going into schools, research and community programs. But it ain't all smooth sailing. Some folks are saying all these fancy plans look good on paper, but they're not always working out in real life. They're complaining about not having enough teachers or the right kind of classrooms. It's like Sheikha Moza's got all these big ideas, but sometimes the details get a little messy. Still, you gotta give it to her. Sheikha Moza's not just sitting around in a palace. She's out there trying to change the world, one classroom at a time. And with all that royal cash behind her, who knows what she'll do next? Speaking of big plans, up next we've got a sheikh who's turning Qatar into a medical powerhouse. You won't believe what he's cooking up in those hospitals. Sheikh Mohammed bin Hamad Al Thani. What if I told you there's a place where AI is diagnosing patients and doctors are using tech straight out of sci-fi movies? Sheikh Mohammed bin Hamad Al Thani is turning Qatar into a medical wonderland, and it's wilder than you'd think. Sheikh Mohammed ain't just building hospitals, he's behind Sidra Medicine, this crazy advanced healthcare facility in Qatar. But that's just the start. This guy's on a mission to completely change how we do healthcare. He's dumping tons of cash into cutting-edge medical research and tech. We're talking personalized medicine that's tailored just for you. Imagine walking into a hospital and getting treatment that's designed specifically for your body. That's the kind of stuff Sheikh Mohammed's working on. And AI diagnostics? Yeah, he's all over that too. They're developing systems that can spot diseases faster than any human doctor. It's like having a super smart robot looking at your x-rays. But here's the real kicker. Sheikh Mohammed ain't keeping all this cool tech to himself. Nah, he's trying to turn Qatar into this global hub for medical tourism. He wants people from all over the world coming to Qatar for treatment. It's like he's building a medical Disneyland in the desert. And get this, Sheikh Mohammed's got plans to tackle some of the world's biggest health problems. We're talking chronic diseases, advanced surgical techniques, all that stuff. It's like he looked at the world's toughest medical challenges and said, yeah, I'll take those on. But it ain't all smooth sailing. Turning a small country into a medical superpower ain't easy. They gotta train doctors, build infrastructure, and convince people to trust this new tech. It's a big job, but Sheikh Mohammed seems up for it. So what's next for Qatar's healthcare revolution? Only time will tell. But with Sheikh Mohammed calling the shots and all that oil money backing him up, you can bet Qatar's medical scene is gonna keep making headlines. And speaking of making things grow, up next we've got a sheikh who's turning the desert green. You won't believe what he's cooking up in those sand dunes. Sheikh Faisal bin Qasim Al Thani. Imagine walking through a lush farm in the middle of the desert. Sound impossible? Sheikh Faisal doesn't think so. He's pouring millions into a project that could change how we think about agriculture in the harshest climates on Earth. Sheikh Faisal bin Qasim Al Thani ain't just talking about going green, he's making it happen, and he's going big. This guy's investing millions in green tech, but that's just the start. He's got plans to turn Qatar's deserts into farmland. We're talking vertical farms that stack crops on top of each other, and seawater greenhouses that use salt water to grow food. It's like he's trying to make the desert bloom, and he's using every trick in the book to do it. But Sheikh Faisal ain't just thinking about Qatar. He's looking to export this tech to other desert countries. It's like he's trying to solve world hunger, one sand dune at a time. And get this, he's not just focusing on basic crops. He's got his eye on luxury produce too. Imagine eating caviar-grade sturgeon raised in the middle of the desert. That's the kind of crazy idea Sheikh Faisal's working on. Now, you might think all this green stuff would clash with luxury living, but Sheikh Faisal's got some wild ideas about sustainable luxury. He's working on eco-friendly materials for high-end products and ethical production methods for luxury goods. It's like he's trying to prove that you can live large without wrecking the planet. But it ain't all smooth sailing. Sheikh Faisal's facing some serious challenges. The desert climate is harsh, and setting up all this green tech takes a ton of cash and effort. Some folks are wondering if it's all worth it. But Sheikh Faisal ain't backing down. He's determined to turn Qatar into a green oasis, no matter what it takes. So what's next for Qatar's green entrepreneur? Only time will tell. But with Sheikh Faisal's deep pockets and big dreams, you can bet Qatar's gonna keep making waves in the world of sustainable tech. And speaking of making waves, up next we've got a princess who's shaking up the fashion world. You won't believe what she's cooking up in those design studios. Sheikha Hanadi bint Nasser Al Thani. What if I told you there's a princess who's changing how we shop for clothes? Sheikha Hanadi bint Nasser Al Thani ain't just another royal fashion lover, she's shaking up the whole industry with some crazy tech. Sure, Sheikha Hanadi's got her own fashion line, but that's nothing compared to what she's cooking up behind the scenes. She's using AI and virtual reality to change how we buy clothes. We're talking AI personal stylists that know your style better than you do, and virtual try-ons that let you see how clothes look on you without even touching them. It's like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it's happening right now in Qatar. But Sheikha Hanadi ain't just about fancy tech. She's also pushing for sustainable fashion. Yeah, you heard that right. A royal who cares about the environment. She's investing millions in eco-friendly materials and ethical production. It's like she's trying to prove that high fashion and sustainability can go hand in hand. And get this, Sheikha Hanadi's got plans to make Qatar a global fashion hub. She's not just bringing in big brands, she's growing local talent too. She's investing in fashion schools and giving young designers a chance to shine. It's like she's building a whole fashion ecosystem right there in Qatar. But here's where it gets really interesting. Sheikha Hanadi's using all this fashion stuff to change how people see Qatar. Every time someone buys a piece from her line or uses her shopping tech, it's like a little ad for Qatar. She's turning fashion into a kind of soft power. So what's next for Qatar's fashion princess? Only time will tell. But with Sheikha Hanadi's royal backing and big ideas, you can bet Qatar's gonna keep making waves in the fashion world. And speaking of making waves, up next we've got the man at the top of Qatar's wealth pyramid. You won't believe what he's got planned for the country's future. Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. Imagine a guy who's not just sitting on mountains of cash, but using it to completely transform a country. That's Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani for you. He's the Emir of Qatar, but he ain't your average ruler. This dude's got a vision that's bigger than all the oil in the Middle East. Sheikh Tamim's net worth? It's so high it'll make your head spin. But that's not even the interesting part. He's taking all that money and pouring it into turning Qatar into this crazy smart country. We're talking billions going into education, tech and culture. It's like he looked at Silicon Valley and thought, yeah, I can do that in the desert. But here's where it gets wild. Sheikh Tamim ain't just thinking about now. He's playing this long game, preparing Qatar for when the oil runs out. 'Cause let's face it, that black gold ain't gonna last forever. So he's building this knowledge economy, getting Qatar ready for a world where brains matter more than barrels. And get this, Sheikh Tamim's got some pretty out there ideas about Qatar's place in the world. He's not content with Qatar just being another rich country. Nah, he wants Qatar to be a global player, throwing its weight around in everything from diplomacy to sports. It's like he's trying to turn this tiny country into a superpower. But it ain't all smooth sailing. Some folks are saying Sheikh Tamim's moving too fast, that Qatar ain't ready for all these changes. And there's been some drama with the neighbors too. But Sheikh Tamim, he's not backing down. He's pushing ahead with his plans, controversy or not. So what's next for Qatar under Sheikh Tamim? Who knows? But one thing's for sure. With this guy at the helm, Qatar's future is going to be anything but boring. He's taking this oil-rich country and turning it into a brain-powered powerhouse. And that, folks, is how you play the long game in the Middle East.